A crippled fortress, bleeding fuel and hope, high above the frozen landscapes of occupied Europe. 10 men trapped inside a machine that, by all laws of physics and warfare, should have already torn itself apart. This is not just a story of survival, it is a story of the impossible. When a B-17 flying fortress lost its entire tail, this is how the crew landed it. It was December 22, 1943. The target? The Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany. For the men of the 97th Bomb Group, 414th Squadron, this was just another mission in a long, brutal war. But for the crew of the B-17F, known as All-American, serial number 41-24406, this day would be different. This day would test their courage, their skill, and their very will to live in ways none of them could have imagined. The All-American was not a new ship. She was a veteran of the skies, her fuselage marked with the scars of previous engagements. At her controls was First Lieutenant Ken Bragg, Jr., a calm and capable pilot from Lawton, Oklahoma. Beside him sat his co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Wayne B. Bud Bowers. In the nose, the bombardier, First Lieutenant Ralph A. Crenshaw, and the navigator, First Lieutenant Harry H. Conley, prepared for the run over the target. The rest of the crew, the engineer, the radio operator, the ball turret, waist, and tail gunners, were at their stations, a tight-knit team of young men bundled against the -50-degree cold. Their mission was part of a massive effort by the 8th Air Force to cripple German industrial production. But the Luftwaffe was waiting. The sky over Bremen was a lethal canvas of black flak bursts and swarming enemy fighters. The All-American had already weathered the initial onslaught, dropping its bombs and turning for home, joining the long, vulnerable stream of bombers heading back to their base in England. Dynamic action shot of Bf-10-9s attacking. The formation was their protection, a flying hedgehog of .50 caliber machine guns. But on the return leg, just after 12:30 p.m., the formation encountered a new threat. A group of Messerschmitt Bf-109s made a head-on pass, their 20mm cannons blazing. The bombers' gunners returned fire, filling the air with tracers. It was a chaotic, violent ballet played out at 25,000 feet. The All-American emerged seemingly unscathed. But the real danger was yet to come. Unseen, unnoticed, another threat was closing in from below. As the formation droned on, a damaged German fighter, a Bf-109 from JG-11, was struggling to stay airborne. Its pilot, Unteroffizier Hugo Ratz, was wounded, and his aircraft was badly damaged. He was likely attempting to bail out or make for a nearby airfield, but in his disorientation, or perhaps in a final desperate act, his flight path intersected with that of the returning bomber stream. In the top turret of the All-American, Staff Sergeant Harry H. Nusel scanned the skies. The initial fighter attack had subsided. A relative calm had settled over the formation. Then he saw it. A blur of movement from below and behind. A German Messerschmitt 109 climbing at an incredible rate on a direct collision course. He screamed a warning over the interphone. "Fighter, coming from below!" In the cockpit, Lieutenant Bragg reacted instantly, pulling back on the yoke to climb. But it was too late. The laws of motion were unforgiving. The Messerschmitt, traveling at nearly 400 miles per hour, did not ram the bomber. Instead, it sliced into it with the terrible, precise violence of a guillotine. The sound was not an explosion, but a horrific, grinding screech of tearing metal. The entire aircraft shuddered violently, thrown sideways by the impact. The German fighter's propeller and engine assembly carved through the rear fuselage of the B-17, just behind the radio room. The left horizontal stabilizer and elevator of the fortress were sheared completely away. The right stabilizer was mangled, barely attached. And then, the unthinkable. The entire tail section, from the waist gunner positions back, including the tail gunner's compartment, was severed. It was simply gone. For a moment, there was only the deafening roar of the wind and the 4 straining cyclone engines. In the cockpit, Bragg and Bowers fought the controls. The aircraft pitched violently nose up, then dropped into a sickening, oscillating dive. The control column was nearly ripped from their hands. The trim tabs were useless. The B-17 was, in every practical sense, unflyable. It was a 25-ton projectile, mortally wounded and beginning a death spiral towards the Earth, 20,000 feet below. A frantic check over the interphone confirmed their worst fears. "Tail gunner, report! Waist gunners, report!" Static. Then a voice from the radio room, shocked and desperate. It was Sergeant Newsell. "The tail's gone. The whole damn tail is gone. I can see sky through the fuselage." And then another, more horrifying discovery. The ball turret, hanging beneath the belly of the bomber, was still occupied. Sergeant Roy K. Bostick was trapped inside, his world a spinning, dizzying view of the European countryside rushing up to meet him. He was alive, but completely vulnerable, unable to rotate the turret to the exit position. The crew in the radio room could see him, a helpless prisoner in a glass and metal cage. The situation was beyond dire. It was hopeless. Standard procedure for such catastrophic damage was to give the order to bail out. But for the man in the ball turret, that was a death sentence. He would be left behind. Lieutenant Bragg made a decision in that split second, a decision that would define all their lives. He keyed his interphone. "Everyone, stay put. We're not abandoning him. We're going to try to fly this thing." What followed was an agonizing battle against physics itself. The B-17, designed with a specific center of gravity, was now wildly unbalanced. The missing tail meant there was nothing to provide stability or leverage for the control surfaces that remained. The aircraft wallowed and yawed, its nose hunting left and right, its wounded frame groaning and flexing with every movement. It was like trying to steer a falling leaf in a hurricane. Bragg and Bowers devised a desperate strategy. They found that by applying full right rudder and maintaining a specific critical power setting on the engines, number 3 and 4 throttled back, 1 and 2 pushing hard, they could just barely maintain a semblance of control. It was a delicate, exhausting dance. A movement of an inch on the controls could send the plane into another violent oscillation. Their muscles ached, their knuckles white on the yokes, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the sub-zero temperature. Meanwhile, in the shattered fuselage, the crew faced their own nightmares. The gaping hole where the tail had been opened the aircraft to the elements. A howling gale, carrying the scent of cordite and cold, ripped through the interior. Loose equipment, flak vests and shell casings were sucked out into the void. The crew had to cling to whatever they could to avoid being pulled out themselves. Oxygen masks were essential. The pressurized cabin was now just a torn tube in the sky. And then there was the ball turret. Staff Sergeant Newsell and Technical Sergeant Joseph B. James, the radio operator, knew they had to get Bostick out. But how? The turret's mechanisms were jammed, likely damaged in the collision. With the plane oscillating wildly, they fought to manually crank the turret into the correct position for the escape hatch to align. It was a task of Herculean effort, their fingers numb, their bodies braced against the violent motions of the aircraft. Minute by agonizing minute, they turned the handle, a few precious degrees at a time. Dramatic interior wide shot of crew clinging to structure. The German coast slipped away beneath them. The cold waters of the North Sea lay ahead. The prospect of ditching in that frigid sea in a plane that was already broken apart was a death sentence. Their only hope was to make it to England. But could they? The aircraft was losing altitude slowly but steadily. Fuel was also a concern. The collision had likely ruptured lines. Every minute in the air was a miracle. Every second, a battle against the inevitable crash. The 10 men aboard the All-American were living on borrowed time, their fate hanging by the thinnest of threads. The skill of 2 exhausted pilots, the strength of 2 men cranking a jammed turret, and the rugged, unyielding design of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. After what seemed like an eternity, a cheer went up over the interphone. Newsell and James had done it. They had manually cranked the ball turret until the doors aligned. They pulled a shaken but alive Roy Bostick from his claustrophobic prison and back into the relative safety of the fuselage. One immediate crisis was averted, but the greater one remained: landing the aircraft. Aerial view of damaged B-17 crossing English Channel. Back in the cockpit, Bragg and Bowers were nearing the end of their endurance. They had managed to nurse the crippled bomber across the North Sea, spotting the white cliffs of Dover. They contacted their base, requesting an emergency landing. But the response was grim. The control tower, unable to comprehend the extent of the damage, advised them to bail out and let the plane crash in a deserted area. Bragg's response was firm. He had come this far. He was going to see it through. He knew a normal landing approach was impossible. The aircraft couldn't slow down without stalling and falling out of the sky. The delicate balance of power and control would be shattered the moment they reduced throttle and lowered the flaps. They had to come in fast, very fast. As they lined up for the final approach to their home field, the control tower and ground crews watched in horror. They could now see the devastation, the missing tail, the mangled rear fuselage flapping in the wind. It was a vision of impossible flight. Bragg called for the landing gear. The usual hydraulic system was damaged. The engineer, Staff Sergeant Joseph C. James, had to use the manual emergency crank. It took every ounce of his strength, but the wheels locked down. Now came the moment of truth. Bragg lined up the shattered bomber with the runway. He kept the power high, coming in at nearly 180 miles per hour, over 50 miles per hour faster than a normal landing speed. There would be no go-around. There was only one chance. The runway rushed up to meet them. Bragg cut the throttles completely at the last possible second. The moment the engines died, the aircraft began to shudder, its fragile stability vanishing. The main wheels touched down with a shriek of rubber. But without a tail, the rear of the aircraft had nothing to hold it up. It slammed down onto the runway in a shower of sparks. Bragg and Bowers stood on the brakes with all their weight. The B-17 careened down the tarmac, swerving violently, the mangled tail section grinding along the concrete, threatening to cartwheel or snap apart at any second. It was a controlled crash, a final, desperate battle for survival on the ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the wrecked and magnificent fortress shuddered to a stop, silence descending for the first time in hours. They had done it. The ground crews rushed to the smoking, twisted wreckage, expecting to find only corpses. Instead, one by one, all 10 crew members emerged, dazed, shaken, but alive. The tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Samuel R. Stryker, and the left waist gunner, Staff Sergeant Forrest C. Voorhees, had been tragically killed in the initial collision, their section of the plane obliterated. But the 8 men in the forward section had survived the impossible. The inspection of the aircraft confirmed the miracle. The All-American had been held together by little more than a few structural longerons, some wiring, and sheer luck. The fact that it remained in one piece long enough to land defied all engineering logic. The crew was debriefed, their story becoming the stuff of immediate legend within the 8th Air Force. For their actions that day, Lieutenant Ken Bragg Jr. and his crew were highly decorated. Bragg himself was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his extraordinary achievement, aerial skill, and determination. The citation noted his superior airmanship and coolness under extreme duress. The other crew members received Silver Stars and Air Medals, recognition of their valor and composure in the face of almost certain death. The All-American itself was too damaged to ever fly again. It was stripped for parts and scrapped, its legacy living on only in photographs and the memories of the men who flew it. But its story endures as one of the most incredible feats of airmanship in World War II. A testament to the toughness of the B-17, the skill of its pilots, and the unbreakable bond of a crew who refused to leave a man behind, even when faced with the void. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Insight Stories as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.